speech, and our democracy depends on people being free to communicate their ideas. We may not like those ideas, we may find some of them ugly and nasty, and certainly there's a point where they become harmful that the criminal law should be involved, but not the way this legislation is setting it out.
Senator Rónán Mullen, what is your chief concern with the new hate speech law?
Well, I think it attacks people's freedom of expression in a way that is really dangerous. If a person communicates material that is likely to incite hatred, then they're guilty of an offence. But the problem is hatred isn't defined in the legislation, and free speech is too important to be shaking a stick over people and leaving them wondering whether what they're saying is legal or not. So any bill that makes it an offence to communicate in a way that is likely to incite hatred, even though none of us likes hatred, you just cannot leave hatred undefined like that. I think the second big concern is that the government seems to have smuggled in a radical new definition of gender. So you have all these people who, by virtue of their protected characteristics, that if somebody communicates in a way that is said to be likely to incite hatred, that they're guilty of an offence. But in the context of gender, where it has no longer been defined as male or female but could include transgender gender expression, we know the big debate that's going on in society about this, the worries that people have about, children in schools being taught, strange new ideologies, women in prisons being endangered by biological males in their prisons, women's sports involving biological males and the dangers, physical and otherwise, that involves. All of this debate is going on in society, and many people are concerned. Now, is somebody who wants to insist, that, for example, men are men and people are born male or female, and who wants to push against this ideology and to do so in a robust way in public debate, are they now going to be prosecuted for communicating in a way that is likely to incite hatred? That's the risk of legislation like this, because you have activist groups who will want to push the Gardaí and the DPP into taking action. We already have a situation where the Gardaí have a very low threshold for investigating what are called non-criminal hate incidents, and it's based on the perception of the individual. That's what's been said is a hate incident. Now that's already questionable as a standard for the Gardaí to be operating from. When you bring that into the criminal law, it is really dangerous to free speech, and our democracy depends on people being free to communicate their ideas. We may not like those ideas, we may find some of them ugly and nasty, and certainly there's a point where they become harmful that the criminal law should be involved, but not the way this legislation is setting it out.
I noticed your colleague Senator Sharon Keoghan mentioning some of the things that might happen in a process where Gardaí are investigating someone. She mentioned that if a person, for example, lives in a flat or in a family home, not only their personal devices but also the personal devices of the other people living there could be seized for an unspecified amount of time. What do you think of that?
Well, yes, and there's all this, and there's even the requirement that people would disclose, for example, the passwords to a mobile phone and so on. Well, whatever about that being legitimate, where the Gardaí are investigating possession of child pornography or other criminality, where you're talking about people's ideas, and this vague definition of hate or the non-definition of hate being involved, it seems to me to be completely intrusive on people's, not only their rights, their natural rights, but their constitutional rights. And I would wonder about the constitutionality of aspects of all this. Remember, it isn't what we know is definitely going to happen. It's the chilling effect on people's desire to communicate their ideas that comes from them having to look over their shoulders and wondering, could I fall foul of the criminal law for expressing my ideas? Could I have a knock on the door from the Gardaí? Could I be asked to hand over my mobile phone and give my password to my phone on pain of criminal prosecution? This is not where we want to be in a democracy.
And what are you planning to do to combat it in the Seanad?
Well, the first thing we're doing is trying to awaken public concern, because this has got through in a very tame way in the Dáil. There have been amendments put down. Some of the civil society organisations have looked for amendments, but generally speaking, they've been very meek, and the media, the mainstream media, have been very compliant about all this. There's no sense that the government is doing anything radical and new and unknown with this legislation, which is certainly the case that they are. So our first job is to get people thinking and talking, and I'm asking people, just because it's gone through the Dáil, to get on to their TDs, because the TDs are the ones who elect the government. So the government needs to feel the heat on this. They need to have intensive lobbying from the public. From the Shannon point of view, we will be tabling extensive amendments on this, dealing with the current non-definition of hatred, looking at the protected characteristics, including gender and how it's currently defined, looking at the defences that they say are there in the legislation, which to my mind are not adequate defences to prevent this chilling effect on free speech. So we are going to press for a long and extensive debate on this in the Shannon. But in the end, the government has the majority in the Shannon. So we need civil society, we need ordinary citizens who are concerned about their natural freedom to communicate, to get onto their politicians and say, look, this is not on.